Welcome to Mom Breaks. In this episode, we talk with Aaisha Alvi, a postpartum psychosis survivor based in Canada. She uses a pen name to transparently share her story and advocate for awareness. Aaisha is a writer and passionate maternal mental health advocate focused on bringing visibility to postpartum psychosis. She experienced postpartum psychosis twice, completely missed by her providers the first time after the birth of her daughter, and only diagnosed after 6 different providers following a miscarriage later. She transformed her lived experience into advocacy, particularly through a memoir. She has a book called A Mom Like That, a memoir of postpartum psychosis, which was published about a year ago in September of 2024. She offers raw, unflinching insights into her delusions, suicidal ideations, the barriers she faced, and the systemic biases that delayed diagnosis and treatment for her, especially as a woman of color. Aaisha volunteers with organizations like Postpartum Support International and regularly speaks, writes, and educates about postpartum psychosis. Her work highlights the urgency of treating postpartum psychosis as the medical emergency that it is, and the need for informed, compassionate care across systems. She's done a lot of thinking on this topic and work in the space, so lots of wonderful wisdom ahead. Before we begin, a note that we do discuss delusions, intrusive thoughts, and some hallucinations that involve self-harm and thoughts of harm towards her baby or visions of her baby being hurt. So take care as you listen. Let's jump in. So welcome. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Megan. There's nothing really I can add to that, but I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here and share. So Thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, yeah, it's early, but we're doing what we can over here in podcast format.
Yeah.
Warm-up question. What's your favorite type of mom break or something for you?
I think my favorite type of mom break is to, I know it sounds so nerdy and weird, but do research about postpartum psychosis.
Yes, reading a good paper, like academic paper.
Not just papers, like I'll read lived accounts, short, brief stories. I've read all the memoirs on postpartum psychosis that have been written, anything that I can get my hands on. I know that's bizarre, but that's what I like to do. But usually I like to do it in a relaxing format when I'm soaking my feet in my foot spa. You know, combine those two things.
Yeah, reading in a foot spa. That sounds like something I need to learn about.
Yeah.
Or soak up. I love reading, and I need to build better like systems to hold myself accountable to finishing books.
See, this way I feel like people are always like, take a break, relax. And I'm like, see, I am relaxing, but I'm also,
learning,
educating myself.
Oh yeah, I'm the same way. Like even when I'm watching shows, I like documentaries, or if it is fictional, I like it to be like historical fiction or.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm the same way. Okay. So we've talked about how you experienced psychosis twice. So after your first pregnancy and then later after a miscarriage. Let's talk about that first pregnancy that you talk about having undiagnosed psychosis. How would you describe the year leading up to your first experience with psychosis?
Yeah, everything was fine. I don't have any type of previous mental health history. So everything was fine. I was finishing my education, and I kind of knew I was at the point in my life with my husband, who I'd been married to for like 5 years at that point, of starting a family. And so we were like super excited and really happy to, get pregnant. And everything was like pretty smooth. Like, I mean, no pregnancy is free from any kinds of issues. But I mean, I would categorize it as like a great pregnancy. We were looking really eager to welcome our baby into our family.
Amazing. You talk about your labor experience being like pretty smooth. Middle of the night labor is something I noticed with lots of blood loss. how are you feeling physically?
Yeah, the birth experience went great. And it was only when I kind of passed out on my way to the washroom that I realized I had experienced severe blood loss. And that was
Mm,
because I'm a pretty small person and my baby was like a normal sized baby. So I think that that was a cause of the blood loss. And so they gave me some oxytocin or Pitocin to close up my uterus. And, it was
hmm.
handled without having to have a blood transfusion, which they were concerned that I would need. I was feeling pretty weak, but I think most moms feel weak after giving birth, right? So I didn't really know, aside from the fact that I kind of felt a little bit anemic and I had anemia before in my life. So it wasn't like I was like radically felt altered or anything like that.
Yeah. Did you have anemia in your pregnancy?
No, it was more
Oh,
like when
okay.
I was like 16 and stuff. So I knew
Okay.
like, weakness wise, I felt like it was probably just the weakness of giving birth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yeah, it leaves you in a state.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So then I remember you saying you had that blackout experience. Would you say, looking back, that felt like an early symptom, like feeling like you had died?
No, no,
No.
I definitely don't think that was the beginning of my psychosis.
Okay.
I really had like completely blacked out. And I know it's weird. It kind of felt like I was in this tunnel type of thing. But I think it was just the tiredness of the labor, just
Yeah.
having lost all the blood, that kind of, thing. And because I
Hmm.
had anemia before, I had never experienced a full blackout like that. I had passed out from anemia before, but it was very like
Huh.
kind of like the snap of a finger type thing. So I don't think that that was the beginning of my psychosis because I
Okay.
quickly, when people told me, no, you didn't, I was like, okay, I didn't.
Okay. So you talk about your Indian heritage and going to your parents' house for a little bit after the baby was born. Can
Mhm.
you share about that postpartum period and what that was like for you?
Yeah. So from the part of India that I'm from, because I want to recognize that practices may differ across India, because, India is
It's
a big,
big.
yeah, it's big. So in the part of India that I'm from, the woman usually traditionally goes to her mom's house and stays for 40 days postpartum. She doesn't usually go with her husband, but my husband was game to come. So I was like, sure, why not? He didn't really like the idea, but he wanted to be there to support and be there with the baby. So he came along too. And during that time, you're treated to herbal baths. You're given healing type of foods, nourishing foods that encourage breast milk and stuff like that. And I was treated to all of that kind of stuff. And I think that that's so helpful to any mom. Like it's just a time to mother the mother and really recognize the fact that this is a new role for the mother too. And I think that that's a wonderful concept. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I love that culture. And well, I wish we could spread that around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really lovely. I want to get to both of your experiences with postpartum psychosis. And with the first, you talk about feeling really sad and then having violent images and then delusions that other people would be acting on the violent images in your head. Can you share more about the symptoms that you had after your daughter?
Yeah. So initially it started with depression and then anxiety about if she was getting enough to drink
Mm,
in terms of I was nursing and breastfeeding. And then after that, the intrusive thoughts started. And like I said, I had never had any mental health issues before. So I never had intrusive thoughts and experienced anything like that. Now I
mm,
know that that's pretty common for 90% of parents, but at that time I didn't. And because there were very violent images that I was seeing, like my daughter's head bashed in and stuff like that, I came up with the idea of giving her away, which I know is so stupid, but I really felt like I wanted to protect my daughter from myself. I kept wondering, like, is this like my mind telling me that, I'm going to harm her or something? And I
mm-hmm,
think at that point, I still was not psychotic. I think that these were just like fears and responses to like emotions that I had never felt before. And I think the
mm-hmm,
psychosis really began to set in when just out of some benign conversation I was having with my mother, it came into my head that my family was likely at risk of acting on the thoughts I was having in my head. And that's a delusion because that's not possible at all, yet
mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
still believed it. And so I started That was, I would say, the beginning of the psychotic symptoms. And then thereafter, I developed even more worsening delusions, and some of them included the fact that I kind of thought that my baby wasn't a baby. Then I kind of moved on to thinking she was autistic, and then I thought my husband was having an affair. And I think for me, the worst one during that whole episode was thinking that my husband wanted to molest our daughter. And
Oh,
yeah, so I thought that she wanted to molest our daughter. And at that point, like, and the other thing is that a lot of times people, in the postpartum, like, work that I do, people easily confuse, like, oh, our intrusive, like, if I have this thought, is it like a delusion? For me, I think the fact that, when something is a delusion, when you're really acting on it, it's not just like a
mm-hmm.
fleeting thought. It's like so because I thought my husband wanted to molest my daughter, I remember once while we were driving, I actually started punching him in the head because I was so
Oh,
mad that he wanted to take our daughter home and molest her. And like, I think any mom thinking that would, protect their child,
yeah.
started punching him in the head. He was like, what the hell's going on here? And he was like on the highway. So
Oh
like,
no.
and it wasn't just this fleeting thought. It was like I was convinced of it, and I was doing that. And for me, like, those kind of delusions persisted. My husband tried to take me to get help like twice to the doctor,
Okay.
but I was dismissed. Like, the doctor was basically like, oh, motherhood is hard, suck it up, kind of thing. And I never got diagnosed. And all I remember is, like, 4 months later, I just remember one day falling asleep, just telling my husband, like, there had been some type of intervention my family had staged to figure out why I was behaving so bizarrely. And I ran away. And when I came back, I just told my husband, like, take me to a mental hospital. Something's wrong with me. I just want to die, like, all the time.
Oh,
Yeah. And I just remember falling asleep and waking up a month later to find out my husband had no job. And then I was just like wondering, why did I believe all those weird things, and just being back to my normal baseline.
wait, what? Wait, like you don't remember a month between that?
Yeah, I don't remember a month. I
Oh.
cannot. All I know is I must have still been breastfeeding her. But I just remember, like, coming to my senses one day and just being like, wow, how come my husband has no job? Because obviously
Mm,
he left it to take care of me. And
wow.
just remembering realizing I had this healthy baby girl, and then just kind of being embarrassed and wondering, like, why did I believe all those, like, weird
Oh,
things?
wow.
Yeah, and that was like at 4 months. And then because of that, like, it was such a traumatizing period, like, thinking about
Yeah.
weird things and stuff, that even though I wanted more children, I just refused to have more children because I was like, what was that about? Like, I have no
Uh-huh.
clue why I thought all these things, believed all these things. So I didn't want more children, even though I loved motherhood. I absolutely loved every part of motherhood, probably because it was just like the normal things of motherhood, and not
Mm.
like trying to keep my daughter away from a molester and being afraid
Yeah.
that my family would abuse her and stuff. So, yeah, so that was basically my first experience with postpartum psychosis.
Okay. I want that story about being in a car
Mhm.
and that I had a similar
Oh,
scary moment in the car with my husband where it was actually like dangerous. Did that feel what would you say that was one of the scariest moments like in the car when you were
well, I mean,
punching him?
I was definitely a danger. We could have all died because my husband was going at like 100 kilometers an hour, and I was punching him in the head, and the car was weaving back and forth.
Ah,
So, but for me, that wasn't the dangerous point. The dangerous point was the fact that I was like, how am I supposed to keep my baby safe from all these threats?
yes,
Because I
everything
wasn't doing
feels
something dangerous in my head, although that was dangerous, but the real danger was all the threats.
yes. Yes, the real intense paranoia or
The
like
delusions.
really believing in those delusions and acting
Yeah.
on them. Okay, so then you said that your spouse helped you get help 2 times. Did that look like an emergency room visit or was that
No.
like a primary care?
Yeah, he took me to my OB doctor that was caring for me during my pregnancy. And yeah, like, basically, I mean, I didn't have words to really say, because to me, these were all like family problems. Like, oh, my family's dangerous. My husband's dangerous. So I just
Oh,
basically went in saying, like, my husband was basically saying, like, she's not acting like herself. I was saying, I'm not feeling like myself. I'm miserable. And you know what I mean? But there was no questions asked, like, nothing to say, like, what exactly is going on. It was kind of more like, yeah, you'll get better. Like, maybe if they had asked me, like, why are you miserable? What's going on? Then, maybe I would have said, well, there's a lot of like, I'm having a lot of family problems. And then they could have tapped into that and seen
and
if there were
seen.
actual, but there was no questions, nothing like that asked.
Yeah. Like if you aren't actively acting like a psych ward patient, then you're not treated like a psych ward patient.
Yeah, but the sad thing is the second time I was actively acting like a psych ward patient and I still got the
Oh,
same
really?
thing. Yeah.
Can you say more?
Okay, so then after like I didn't want to have more children after that because I was so confused about what had happened to me. And I kind of did my
Yeah.
own research, like I said, soaking my feet in some water. I did my own research and I came across, but you might be like, why did you only come across this now? But I came across postpartum depression. And this was 20 years ago, right? So it wasn't really on the radar at that time as much
Uh-huh.
as it is now. And when I came across postpartum depression, I was like, oh my God, maybe this is what I had. But all my
Mm.
symptoms didn't line up. Like I didn't read anything about thinking, like believing bizarre things or anything like that in the descriptions of postpartum depression. But I still kind of concluded that maybe that's what was wrong with me. And
Mm.
so, with that kind of in hand, and with all my friends having like second and third babies, I was like, oh, okay, I want another baby. And so we got pregnant again. And this time I had a miscarriage at 14 weeks, which was almost like four
Oh.
months. And after
Uh-huh.
I found out it was a miscarriage. So I found out that the baby had
Oh.
passed away in utero. And I was told that my body would release the baby in a couple of weeks. And
Oh.
so, yeah, so it was really sad for me because I was,
Yeah.
I had really like, invested in this thought of my new baby and stuff like that. By the time that I learned that I had experienced a miscarriage and that my body would be releasing the baby in like 2 weeks, I really had enough time to grieve over that loss. I'm a religious person. So, I kind of said, you know what? I put my trust in God. So God must know that there's something in this for me, right? So I made
Uh-huh.
peace about it. Emotionally, I had made peace about it in those 2 weeks. So that's why when the baby was actually released from my body, it was really odd that I felt normal for a couple of
Mm.
days and then suddenly I felt like super depressed again. And this time it was like
Mm.
I felt so depressed that I couldn't even lift the corners of my mouth no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't like even force myself to smile. So again,
Mm.
I was like this reminded me of the time that like what I had kind of felt after my first delivery. So I was like on top of it and I was like, okay, I've never felt like this before in my life except after I delivered my daughter. So I
Yeah.
was quick to try to go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor and I told her everything that was going on. And I said, you know what? Like, I just feel like this is odd because I was feeling normal. And then suddenly I just started feeling like depressed and I can't smile and everything. And she said, oh, you're grieving. But I said, but I don't feel like this is grief. Like I would know if I was grieving. And she said, oh, no, you're just grieving. And, I was sent home.
Mm.
So that was my first appointment. That was doctor number one. Then the symptoms kept persisting. So I went back to the doctor. And again, I was dismissed. At this, I was starting to experience repetitive thoughts. I kept hearing mundane thoughts like telling me to get my house organized because I had taken off from work because of the miscarriage. I had taken off of work and I had this idea that, oh, I'll just get my house reorganized. So I kept having this thought and it just wouldn't stop. Like I literally couldn't go to sleep because it kept playing over and over again. So I went back to the doctor and explained what was happening. And she said, oh, you're having ruminating thoughts. You'll get better, and sent me home. That was doctor visit number two. And then the thoughts started getting loud and they had like a volume to it. And they were telling me disturbing things. And some of the disturbing things were I my thought was like telling me like my daughter needed to die so that she could go to
Oh.
heaven. And so
Oh.
yeah, so I was like, I didn't agree with it. And I was like, why is that thought coming into my head? And I was scared. So I went again to the doctor, to a different doctor. These are all different doctors, okay? Like,
Were these OBs?
no, they were all doctors that I'd had in my life. So they
Oh.
were like my primary care. They knew me. Then the third doctor was a
Oh.
psychologist. And the
Okay.
psychologist told me, oh, it sounds like you're having intrusive thoughts and, you'll get better. Just, take soaking baths, herbal teas, and stuff like that. So I went home after that. And then literally they started really sounding like a voice and telling me like horrible things that I didn't want to hear, like that my husband was going to leave me, that I was going
Oh.
crazy. And so I went to the doctor again, and this is like the fourth doctor. And I told her I was hearing a voice in my head, and I was still
Okay.
sent home. And I told her the voice was telling me disturbing things, and I didn't want to hear it. And I was still,
What?
yeah. And then it got to the point where like I started like, seeing things and stuff like that. So I went back to the doctor again. This is the fifth doctor. And while I was at the fifth doctor trying to get help, I heard voices telling me to stab my daughter to death. I heard
Ah.
voices telling me to push people into traffic. I heard voices telling me to open up women's bellies and take out their babies. I was horrified. So I told the doctor, I literally went and told the doctor, like, I want to be hospitalized because I'm feeling like doing bad things to people. And because I don't want to, I was simultaneously feeling like killing myself. Like, I wanted to throw
Hmm.
myself into traffic because I didn't want to harm anybody. And
Hmm.
even though I explained all this to the doctor, they said, you're having a panic attack. We're going to give you a small dose of antidepressants. You can go home. And so I was given a tiny dose of antidepressant, a large dose of a anti-anxiety medication, and I was sent home.
And
And
did the medication help at all?
no, because I had psychosis. And so I went home. I have no idea. Like, I can only say that God is who helped me to stay away because I was experiencing extremely violent urges. I felt like I started believing that the voices I was hearing in my head were from the devil, and it was the devil that
Oh.
was trying to control me. And I remember even like when I came home with those medications, I told my husband to hide the knives, and he was like, "Why?" And because I was scared that the devil was going to force me down the stairs and get a knife and butcher my whole family.
Oh.
But a week later, I was referred to a psychiatrist. And she's the only reason that I'm alive today because she was a perinatal psychiatrist. She,
Oh.
at that point, I was so far gone into my delusions and hallucinations that I was not even saying, like, in those previous appointments, I had been saying I was hearing voices. I was telling them that I felt like harming people. I was saying, but at this point, I was
Oh.
so far gone. I was almost like catatonic ish. I was so slow and stuff like that that I wasn't able to articulate enough that my psychiatrist just kind of she was like, you're not telling me enough for me to convince you have postpartum psychosis, but I feel like you had psychotic features in your previous postpartum. So I think I'm trying to ward off a psychotic episode this time. And even though I wasn't hospitalized, she started me on the tiniest dose of antipsychotic medication. It wasn't
Okay.
enough to quell anything, but I kept calling her because of everything that was happening. Because I started seeing corpses around me. I started thinking the walls were talking to me and the devil was going to force me to like decapitate people. So
Oh.
I kept calling my doctor, like, oh my God, like freaking out. And so then she kind of realized that, like, wait, more is going on with this woman. So she upped my antipsychotics. Like the first day I saw her, she had given me one pill, which was like, I think 30 milligrams. She upped it
Okay.
to 10 times to 300 milligrams of antipsychotic medication, Seroquel. And at that point, my psychosis broke. And then I started
Oh.
reversing backwards through all my symptoms.
Hmm.
And after 3 months, I was weaned off of my antipsychotic medication and I've never looked back.
So then how much time had passed from, so you had the miscarriage, you felt down, you went to the first provider. How much time had passed over
In
all of those providers?
2 weeks, I saw six providers.
What?
Yeah, that's
Wow.
that's what was like. That's why I felt like I needed to write my book because it's like unconscionable the level of ignorance that existed among all those providers, because my psychiatrist was like, you said everything that should have gotten you immediately hospitalized,
Right.
right? And nobody did, even like nobody except for a resident that I saw, which was at my fifth appointment, where I was saying like, lock me up. Before I saw the actual doctor, our resident came in. She's the only one who bothered to try to do a screening tool on me, a depression inventory.
Oh.
Had that depression inventory been done on me after appointment one, my psychiatrist said that they would have seen that you were severely depressed and been able to give you medication. I'm sure, Megan, that you know that most cases of postpartum psychosis have some kind of bipolar link, meaning that the people either have underlying bipolar, or they transition into bipolar, or they have manic symptoms in their psychotic episode. I had none of those. And so
Mm.
it was because severe depression was left untreated. And that's why I
Mm.
psychotic features. So, according to my psychiatrist, had I been treated, had they even done that depression inventory on me at visit number one, they would have seen, I would have scored so high that they could have seen that I was severely depressed,
Mm-hmm.
would not have needed all the medication that I need. I was taking, at one point, I was taking 20 pills a day for 3 months.
Wow.
20 pills a day, like 10 antipsychotic pills, 5 antidepressant, like it was like I was on this, but I came off of everything, and I'm so grateful that those medications existed. But did I need to go through the trauma that,
Yeah, to get that
yeah,
bad.
no, I didn't. And that's what, like, that's why, like, I decided to do awareness work, because a lot of those cases, like Lindsay Clancy went to 5 different doctors like me, right? A lot
Yeah.
of people went to multiple doctors and kept getting dismissed, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's why this illness doesn't need to lead to loss of life. It doesn't.
Right.
Out of all the postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, it is the easiest one to treat. But you can't treat it effectively if you don't know anything about it.
Right. You said that your psychiatrist had identified potential postpartum psychosis with your first pregnancy. Was this a psychiatrist you had worked with before?
No, no, I had just met her. When I got referred to her, she asked me all the questions and basically
Mm.
told her everything. She was like, how did your first pregnancy go? And I told her about the fact that I wanted to give my daughter up for adoption. I was embarrassed, but I told her that, I remember thinking all these weird things that I found out weren't true. So that's how she pieced it together. And she was like, what did you take to get better? And I was like, nothing. And then she was like, that was like, whoa. I remember her like jolting up in her seat. So
Huh.
that's how she, even though I was not saying much about what was happening to me the second time around, because I truly, at that point while I was with her, I had this other delusion in my head that because I'm of Muslim faith, the delusion was that because she was not of Muslim faith, she wouldn't understand that this was a true
Uh,
spiritual crisis I was experiencing. So I was not telling her anything like, oh, the devil's doing this to me, because I thought that was part of my religion type of thing, right?
oh.
So that's why she didn't like, had I gone in and told her the stuff that I had told the other doctors, which is like, I'm hearing voices, I feel like harming people, then she would have automatically been like, hey, you are psychotic. But she was kind of like, and I went back and I asked her, you told me that I wasn't saying anything to you that made you convinced that I needed to be hospitalized. What made you think of starting me on antipsychotic medication? And she said, it was just that every time I kept asking you a question, you look like you had this glazed look, and like there was some other conversation you were
Oh.
part of in your head. And that kind of
Oh.
made me feel like you were somewhere else. And
Hmm.
and I remember she did ask me this question. She was like, "Do you think people are watching you?" And at that time, I was like, "No," because I was like, "No, I'm having the spiritual issue." Like, and I was thinking to myself, like, "Oh my gosh, she thinks I'm delusional, but I'm not." So I'm pretty sure she asked me that question of like, "Do you think people are watching you?" Because she was sensing that I wasn't really present. Like I seemed to be interacting with something that nobody else was witness to. And so she was
Uh-huh.
so astute. She like went beyond my words to look at everything. And I'm so grateful to her.
Was your husband with you? Like, did she
Yes.
get any intake from your husband?
Yes, for sure. She
Okay.
my husband was right in that interview with me because, like I said, I was so slow that I remember even walking to her door. She turned around to my husband and she said, "Is she always a little slow?" And immediately in my mind, I was like, "Oh my God, she thinks like, like I have some developmental issues." And I got really pissed off.
Oh.
I was like, I told her like I was like slowly talking. I remember saying like, "I'm smart. I have multiple degrees." And she was like, "No, no, that's not what I meant." But in my head, I felt like she was like questioning my intelligence level. And this was so funny.
Oh.
After I got back to baseline, and my husband, after like the first 2 or 3 appointments, he stopped coming with me. And then at one of my later appointments, she asked for him to come in. And my husband came and she turned to my husband and she said, "Is this your wife?" And I was like, "What?" And she said, "I'm asking you this because this version of Aaisha is very different from the person I met,
Mm.
like 3 months ago. And I want to make sure this is not mania or hypomania because I'm a very like conversational person." And my
Uh-huh.
husband's like, "No, no, this is the wife I always married. This is the one I've always known outside of her 2 bouts, like
Yeah.
after a pregnancy." You know what I mean?
How did that feel for you in that moment?
Oh, I just felt vindicated because she kept asking me, like, "Is this your normal baseline?" I was like, "Yes." And she goes, but that's not what you were. And I was like, "Yes," because I was so sick then. So she wanted to
Uh-huh.
make sure, because as a good psychiatrist, she would have to vet out whether or not I had an underlying bipolar condition or anything. And so she watched me for like a full year to make sure that her initial diagnosis, that mine was a case of major depressive disorder or postpartum onset with psychotic features, was accurate. So she
Mm.
watched me for that full year and a half and was like, yes. So she's a wonderful doctor, and I'm so grateful to her.
I'm so grateful that you found, even though it took 6 providers, you found someone who could put the pieces together.
Oh yeah, for
Do
sure.
you attribute the medication largely for being what helped you? So you weren't hospitalized. Is that right?
No, no, I was never hospitalized, but 100%. The antipsychotic medication, they are life saving. Like
Mm.
in my book, I literally talk about when I took the antipsychotic medication, I would suddenly feel like mist that I had never noticed before. My eyes would suddenly be like leaving, and then I would get
Oh.
insight. Like I would be like, "Oh, what is this?" And then I would notice that when I was psychotic, I would feel like, "Oh, yes, I have so much insight into everything." But the antipsychotic medications would make me realize, no, you're sitting in a bit of fog. Like you actually
Mm.
have no insight into anything.
Mm.
So I used to joke around with my psychiatrist that they're magic pills because they suddenly gave me like a realistic perspective of the muck that I was sitting in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
for sure, I'm like a big proponent of the fact that I know there's a lot of fear around antipsychotic medications and severe things, but I would not be alive today. My daughter would not be alive. I'm not even sure if those strangers that I was feeling like shoving into the street would be alive today if my illness had been allowed to continue on the trajectory that it was going.
Yeah. Was there any, because as I've talked to different survivors, sometimes as you're in psychosis and needing to take medication, you might like resist medication. Was there any part of you as you went home with your medication that like didn't want to take it? Or were you
Um,
like behind it?
Well, first I was like, at one point when my psychiatrist said, I'm trying to stave off a dangerous psychotic episode, so I'm going to put you on this new class of medications. And being an undergraduate student who did their fourth year courses in psychotic illnesses, my
Mm,
my my fourth year thesis was in psychotic illnesses. So I
no
knew I
way.
knew I knew about psychotic illnesses, but not in the context of postpartum. So I immediately said to her, like, "Wait, are you going to put me on antipsychotic medication?" And she was like, "Yes." Like she was so happy that I knew about that class of medication. I immediately started crying and I was like, "You're hurting
Oh,
my feelings by saying that I'm crazy." And so
oh,
I had stigma toward that, definitely. But at the same time, I was so horrified and terrified by what was going on with me that I don't think I really questioned it. And then as I took it and as my doses started increasing, like with every different call that I was making to my psychiatrist, She would say, okay, I want you to up it by another 2. I want you to up it by another. I would notice that certain things like would be going away. So there was a point at which I was like, I don't care. I'll take the whole damn bottle if my life
Mm-hmm.
be better. Like, you know what I mean? Maybe if my
Yeah.
symptoms hadn't been so severe and I hadn't been as terrified, maybe I would have questioned it. But I was just like, I'll do anything just to make like what's happening to me stop, you know? I'm so terrified that I just want what's happening to stop.
Yeah, totally. Have you learned so something that's kind of come up as I've been in the space and talked to other survivors is sometimes there's like OCD and psychosis can happen. Have
Hmm.
you learned much about the
Yeah.
distinction there?
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. So, because initially, then after I started getting out of everything, I was debating with my psychiatrist and saying, but I think I have postpartum OCD because I read about all these things now. And so I told her, I think I have postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis. And the thing is, I know there'd be a lot of people that will go and they'll say, you know, I had postpartum depression, I had postpartum anxiety, I had postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis. But you just can't have all of those things. What happens is that the one that accounts for all of your symptoms is the diagnosis that you get, right? So in webinars that I give on postpartum psychosis, I explain it like this. So postpartum mood and anxiety disorders are like a spectrum, like a rainbow. So some of the colors bleed over into the next, right? So therefore, the depressive symptoms will bleed, but it doesn't bleed backwards, okay? So meaning that depressive symptoms can bleed over into anxiety. Anxiety symptoms can bleed over into OCD. OCD symptoms can bleed over into postpartum psychosis, but it doesn't go backwards. Hallucinations and delusions will not bleed over into OCD. So the difference is that somebody with postpartum OCD will never experience hallucinations and delusions, because if they're experiencing hallucinations and delusions, what they have is postpartum psychosis, not postpartum OCD. I had a lot of OCD thoughts. I had a lot of intrusive obsessional thoughts, but my doctor said we would never say that you had postpartum OCD because you also had delusions and hallucinations, which puts you in the category of postpartum psychosis. So I never go around saying I had postpartum depression and postpartum obsessive compulsive, because the one diagnosis that accounts for all of the symptoms that I had was postpartum psychosis. And more
Uh,
specifically, it was a major depressive disorder with postpartum onset and psychotic features. Does that make sense, Megan?
Yes. Yeah, I like that analogy. I haven't heard that before. And it tracks in like sort of like I like the spectrum and bleeding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, because I debated with because I was like, no, but I definitely had OCD thoughts. And she said, yeah, but people that have postpartum OCD don't have delusions and hallucinations. They
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
don't. So you can't give yourself that thing. And people with postpartum depression don't have psychotic features unless they had postpartum psychosis.
Unless they
Yeah.
All right. In our last episode, we talked with Dr. Berndorf. She noted how postpartum psychosis isn't a final stop on a progression of PMADs. They don't lead to another like stepping stones. These conditions don't unfold in a straight line. And just wanted to note Aisha's analogy of a bleeding rainbow speaks to the lived experience, not about one condition developing into another, but rather about how some of the symptoms can blur across conditions. Of course, certain symptoms define, a condition, and for postpartum psychosis, that is certainly that loss of touch with reality. So hallucinations, delusions, strong false beliefs. If those are involved, you have psychosis on your hands and not any other PMAD. So with that said, mental health symptoms don't always stay neatly in their lanes, and we know that when PMADs go untreated, they can intensify. We also know that anxiety and depression are deeply intertwined. In the general adult population, in one study I've looked at, about half of those with anxiety have comorbid depression, and a third of adults with depression have comorbid anxiety. So they often happen together. There are some smaller studies looking at postpartum women that show similar overlap. A third of women with major depressive disorder have comorbid anxiety, and up to half of women with anxiety experience comorbid depressive symptoms. Anyway, so understanding that these two can happen at the same time can help bring awareness that, if you do have both, you can have more severe symptoms than if you have just a one condition. And so that can influence how your providers would approach treatment. Next, we'll hear how Aaisha feels her PMAT experiences have changed her.
I think they've changed me to the extent that, like I mentioned, I did my undergrad in psychology. And I used to always have I used to kind of look down on psychiatrists. I feel bad because I was always like, nobody needs a psychiatrist when you can have a psychologist that can help talk you through the problems. And sometimes I feel like maybe that's why I was smacked with this illness, so that I could realize that there are some conditions that absolutely need a psychiatrist. They are very biochemical in nature. And so I always used to kind of look down and be like, oh, people only need medication when they're not strong enough to handle it. And that's why, despite being dismissed all those times, I'm a fighter. But I didn't really fight back as hard as I could have, because mentally in my mind, it was like when they kept saying that, oh, you can do this, you're doing fine, it kind of resonated with my own personal beliefs, like, oh, I'm strong enough to take this on by itself. But so I feel like if I had not had that kind of stigma personally towards medication initially, maybe I would have fought back harder. Like I would have said, no, I want a referral to a psychiatrist. You know what I mean? But they were kind of things that echoed my own personal beliefs of like, oh no, you can overcome this on your own type of thing. Right. Yes. So that I've really changed in that perspective. I'm just like, you know what? Like I would love, if I could go back in time, I would love to become a perinatal psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I'm too old now to go and study medicine and become a perinatal psychiatrist. So that's why I was just like, I feel like I'll try to make my mark in the field by spreading awareness based on, my lived experiences of this illness, because like I mentioned, I'm a religious person, and I have to believe that God made me suffer through this illness for 4 months the first time, and for like 2 months before I got properly diagnosed the second time. So there has to be some good that God intended to come out of it,
Yeah. I would love to hear more about how you feel your Muslim faith played into your experiences.
I think my Muslim faith played into my experiences in the sense that the first time around, I had no religious delusions whatsoever. And there was nothing like that I would say was connected to a religious delusion or hallucination. But I think the second time, some of my delusions were related to religion, and that was the fact that the devil was controlling my mind and controlling my actions and stuff like that. But I really think that I got to that point of believing that because I did keep going to the doctors to find out what was wrong with me. Initially, my take on the situation is that something is wrong, but because I kept getting dismissed, your mind naturally has to make sense of what's happening. And so it grasped at what, it grasped at things that were an essential part of me, which is my faith. And so, because nobody can go on living when something is going on with you, our mind naturally wants to make sense of what's happening. And I was not being able to be given the opportunity to make sense of it from a medical standpoint because everybody kept dismissing me. So I think then my mind was like, oh, okay, this must be what's going on. So it was in that kind of sense. But at the same time, I know that there are people who come from cultural backgrounds, and I've also met Muslim people who don't really have a good understanding of what the faith says about mental health. And I didn't have that. I came from my dad is very highly educated, and he always taught us, like, rather than succumbing and believing cultural things that don't have basis, you need to go back and look at what the reality of what the faith says. And if you go back, like, the Muslim world was among the first to recognize that mental health conditions were mental health conditions. Whereas in medieval Europe and places like that, they were drilling holes to let demons and stuff out. The Muslim world is the first to have developed the first psychiatric ward in the whole world. So,
wow.
Yeah, some new information in the 9th century in what is presently known as Iraq and Baghdad. That's where you find the first psychiatric ward. And they treated the
Wow.
patients very humanely and stuff like that. So, from that standpoint, I didn't have any stigma toward seeking care or anything like that. My family was very encouraging of me getting the help that I needed. I think my mind just had to come up with a reason for what was happening. And in that kind of way, it grabbed some religious beliefs because part of my religious beliefs involve an evil character or evil demon that can, do bad things. So my mind had to make sense because I really felt like these thoughts are not coming from me. Who the hell could they be coming from? Okay, it must be the
Uh-huh.
devil. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So that was the most clear religious theme, that the devil was behind.
Yes. Because I couldn't understand who else would be wanting me to hurt people that I love.
Yeah. Okay, if you had asked me where the first psychiatric ward in the world was, I don't think Baghdad would have been in my top 10 guesses. But that's where it began, in the 9th century Islamic world. So thinking about that, how revolutionary it would be that back in the 800s, when care often looked like, at home herbalists, charm workers, spiritual healers, while illness was often attributed to spirits or divine punishment, and treatments were combined herbs and rituals or incantations. There were skilled practitioners and people who studied medicine, of course, but there was less organization around medical systems and likely no structured care for mental illness particularly. So pretty amazing that this public hospital in Baghdad in 805 was Bimaristan is what it was called. That was not, I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it, but it's the house of the sick. It was exactly that, a place where anyone, regardless of creed, status, or wealth, could receive free professional and humane care. So this was a hospital with many functions, and a pioneering physician introduced this idea of a dedicated space to help patients with mental illness. So beginning the concept of a psych ward. So the psych ward was remarkable, and the hospital was remarkable, not only for the clinical care, but also for the guiding principles behind it. So they combined Greek medical philosophy as well as other medical philosophies, but including Hippocratic observation and ethics, Persian organizational models for staffing and administration, so medical records, and Islamic ethical frameworks emphasizing dignity, compassion, and charity. So patients experiencing hallucinations, delusions, mania, or deep sadness were treated as medical patients, not morally flawed or possessed. They received rest, baths, nutritious food, music therapy, social engagement, and careful observation. The hospitals were intentionally built in the city centers so patients could be connected to the community rather than isolated in the margins. The socioeconomic realities of patients were considered, and at discharge, many were given money or resources to help them reintegrate and start the next chapter, so ensuring financial hardship wouldn't push them back into crisis. It's inspiring and a little heartbreaking to learn about this. For me, I'm reflecting on how far we've come far, but also we've kind of veered negatively into some pretty inhumane practices along the way. And we had a model more than 1,000 years ago that treated mental illness with compassion and care. But we, had some hospitals focused on confinement, stigma, and even some dangerous procedures that kind of centered on this practice of releasing demons. As we discuss perinatal mental health today, it's grounding to remember that compassion in medical care has deep historical roots. The context around these hospitals in Baghdad, or this hospital example in Baghdad, show us that humane mental health care isn't a modern invention. It's an ancient idea and practice, and returning to that ethos may be part of what we need to move forward. And then you're saying, I heard that there's sort of a distinction of what's practiced culturally versus maybe what's in scripture. Is that what you're getting at? Like sometimes there is stigma culturally, but maybe in scripture it's more like embracing of mental health?
Yeah, like culturally, I think that people just, just go with what their ancestors believed, right? And I can understand why people's ancestors might have believed certain things when they didn't have access to medical institutions and things like that, right? But like my dad, because he is a very educated man, always encouraged us to be like, no, don't just believe the hype about,
Mm.
look back, critically examine things, So I never grew up like, I know that there are Muslim people and Indo-Pak people, because my background is Indian, who believe in, like Satan possessing you and stuff like that. But I never grew up with that. And yet one of my delusions was that. But I think that was because when push came to shove, I had to make sense of what was happening to me. And so I grasped at somebody else's, because I have never been the type. My family is not the type that believes in demonic possession and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but your brain is it's put to the edge and it's trying to make sense of everything and it does
Yeah,
what it does.
and it just pulls out whatever it knows that can explain a very
Uh-huh.
uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. So then afterward, how did you make sense of it spiritually? Or
Spiritually, there was
or
nothing
was
really
it
to.
like you understood that was a delusion and
Yeah.
there
So
was no impact?
yeah, like what happened is that here, if you don't mind, I'll just read this one sentence from my book. So it actually talks about exactly the question that you're asking. Given the religious delusions I experienced during my second time with postpartum psychosis, some may wonder what I truly believe about the role religion and God played in my illness. That's what you're asking, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and well, like how you
I,
afterwards went
yeah.
forward.
Yeah. So when Dr. Baker learned of the true extent of my religious delusions as I got better, she was floored. She asked how it was that I managed to come in and continue seeing her despite feeling like I couldn't reveal everything to her because she wasn't Muslim. I didn't know
Mm,
then what to say, but I do now. My religious delusions may have prevented me from getting help sooner, but God is
mm,
why I was sent Dr. Baker and Sarah Quill. So for
mm.
me, the true thing of God was the fact that he helped me get the help I need and directed me to the medications. And I realized those delusions were just like a delusion.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How would you describe your long-term recovery process?
My long-term recovery process, I think what I needed the most help with was the fact that I was very angry. I had a lot of resentment toward my family because I feel like they had failed me in not getting me help. Everybody needs somebody to blame, right? So I was like, you guys could have done a better job. If I'd killed myself or our daughter, I could have been institutionalized forever, blah, blah, blah. But then part of my recovery is soaking my feet in reading all about everything. And as I continue to read and stuff like that, and I understand the nature of this illness, and I also understood that one thing that really popped out to me was that there was no books really at the time that I had suffered. So I was reading like small snippets of people's stories. And one thing that I really saw was that people were able to get help a lot faster than I was. Like one delusion in, they were able to get help. And so that's when I started realizing that it was because of the ignorance of the doctors. It was also because of the fact that I am a woman of color, because I saw that women of color with all types of PMADs have such difficulty in securing help. And so understanding all of that kind of stuff shifted my resentment away from my family. And my new target became I need to make sure that there is awareness about this condition, so that what happened to me doesn't persist and doesn't happen to other people. And that's kind of, like I went to therapy to help me like digest my resentment and stuff like that. But learning more about all of this is what helped me to redirect my what I was feeling.
Yeah. When you reflect back, what do you remember about the questions you were left with?
Questions I was left with what do you mean? Sorry.
Like after you stabilized, well, so you started reading a lot and like
Mhm.
redirected your energy towards raising awareness, understanding postpartum psychosis. Like, what were the questions that drove you there?
The questions that really drove me there was that even though my psychiatrist kept telling me that this was an illness, I couldn't help but feel like maybe it was a testament to the fact that I was innately evil some way, somehow. And
Mm.
so I just was like really wanting to find out a lot. But actually, that question was really put to rest pretty quickly, because anybody that has read my book will know that it starts off with me helping another woman who had postpartum psychosis and seeing how she behaved just like me and was manifesting the same symptoms is what kind of put the period at the end of the sentence that my doctor had been trying to convince me, which is this is an illness. This has nothing to do with the type of person you are or you were. And when I saw her behaving like that exact way, I was like, oh my God, she's right. Like, because I don't even know this woman. And she's saying and doing all the same things that I was saying and doing. And so then that's what really propelled me into doing more research and wanting to learn more and everything like that.
How much later was that experience from your experience?
Oh my gosh, I had just weaned off of my antipsychotic medications the week
Oh,
before. It took me like 2 months before I was properly stabilized on medications. And then it was like 3 months after I was stabilized and I had just weaned off of my antipsychotics like 5 days
right.
before. And then I had the opportunity to help this woman.
Wow. That is so fresh.
Yeah, I was like super green. And I was then
Yeah.
scared, like, oh my God, will I have to go back because this is like so traumatizing to help. But what would have been
Yeah.
really traumatizing is if I had not been able to help her, because,
Mm,
you know, like if she had gone through with her plan of, like with the urges that she was having on harming her child, that would have really triggered me and
right.
probably sent me backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a powerful way to start the memoir. It drew me in. Like, what are the chances that you
You know,
were in her circle?
it's so funny. Like I've said this, I think before in another interview, but my acquiring editor at the publisher that did publish my memoir, she asked me at one point, she was like, did that actually happen? And I was like,
Oh,
yes, it happened. Because she was wondering, like, did I take some creative liberties? But no, I was
truly.
most shocked by it happening was me and my family. But I really do believe that maybe that incident was sent to my life to help me put a period to the end of that question of like,
Mm.
is this an illness or is it because like, as a bad person type of thing?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I feel it shows how like your big heart, like you are such a good person to go out of your way and support someone who is struggling who you didn't even know. Like yeah, totally. For me, it was like, wow, what a beautiful story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. One other question I have is how do you approach mental health today?
Well, it's not just me. I feel like it's my whole family. Anytime anybody in my family or I see anybody that's struggling, we just want to make sure that they know that there's help out there for the way they're feeling, that they shouldn't feel bad or ashamed about what's going on. And it's just
Uh-huh.
an illness. And we can help connect you to the places that can help. Mental health disorders will always exist, but there is no need to suffer from them and be pained by them. Do you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
help out there. And even like a severe mental illness like postpartum psychosis, there's help out there. There is, and
Hmm.
nobody should be ashamed. There's no shame in experiencing an illness, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes, that is, I feel the same way. Like it's I think it normalized it for me. It was like this is something we just need to talk about and make sure
Hmm.
because it happens to everyone or it
Yeah,
can happen to anyone.
exactly.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about advocacy and privacy, and I would love to hear how you've approached this in your maternal mental health advocacy work.
Yeah. So initially, I had my book out like about, I would say, well, I wrote it in 3 months after I had experienced
Wow.
everything that I experienced. And the reason for that was because I like to read and I couldn't find anything out there on postpartum psychosis. And my psychiatrist, I complained to her and she said, well, why don't you write one about your experience? And I was like, okay, I will. And so I wrote one like in 3 months and then I started sending it off to publishers, right? And
Hmm.
I sent it off to publishers and I kept getting rejected at that time because they said it was too violent. When I showed it to my psychiatrist, she was like, you might want to make sure that you take steps to protect your identity, because everything that you write in here can potentially negatively impact you. Of course, nobody's going to say that you're going to get fired because of this, but they might come up with a different reason. You know what I mean? Depends. Like,
Yeah.
she knew the field that I work in, right? So, I
Uh-huh.
mean, there's some fields I'm sure that wouldn't negatively impact you, right? But there are other fields, if you're working with vulnerable communities, for all different types of reasons. Like, if you are professing to have experienced these kinds of thoughts and stuff that I do mention, I'm very open and candid about in my memoir, it could come back in ways. So my psychiatrist was the one that suggested that. And then I talked to some lawyers and they were also like, yeah. And then another thing that I found was that there is a lot of hate that comes to you from
Mm-hmm.
admitting to certain things. And I do still get remarks from people that tell me that I need to be exercised. Yeah,
What do you mean exercised?
like The Exorcist.
Oh, exorcism.
Yeah,
I thought you meant
yeah.
like physical exercise.
No, exorcism. Yeah, like I need to be exercised.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So for
Wow.
all kinds of, yeah, there's so much ignorance around this. And then the other thing too is that I don't paint, like I don't sugarcoat anything in my memoir. I specifically talk about the things, the wrong things that people in my family did and said. Part of my story, as you know, starts with me helping this woman. I wanted to protect her right to privacy too, right? Because though our stories intersect, it is still her story and maybe she doesn't want it out there, right?
Yeah.
So for those reasons, I always remain off camera. And after my publishers and stuff read my memoir and they expressed interest, I told them that I would never appear on camera. And they were fully like, they understood when they saw what the
Yeah.
material is, they understood. And they put it in my contract that I will never do any on camera interviews because I wanted to be open and share the reality of this illness, have people understand how it leads to tragedy without having to like look over my shoulder and be like, well, is this negatively going to impact me if I say this? I wanted the truth to
Mm.
be out, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that, I'm protected. My family is protected from blowback,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's why, like initially, when I was pitching and stuff like that, I didn't express any of those things in any of my pitches that, I wouldn't be on camera, all this kind of stuff. But I'm so grateful that my psychiatrist, she gave me that thing because she
Yeah.
said, I guess she didn't want to see me back in her office for a different mental health reason.
Oh. Yeah, it's wise to not feel like you need to be holding back to not have repercussions, that you could be saying everything and not being worried about your professional,
Yeah,
yeah,
professional.
life.
And the other thing is sometimes people say to me, the best way to eliminate stigma is to be open and to appear on camera. Yeah, but that's easy for you to say, depending on
Mm,
the extent of how bad your postpartum psychosis got.
yeah.
Had my postpartum psychosis experience been the one that I had after my daughter was born, yeah, I don't feel like I needed to be off camera, right?
Hmm.
But if I'm admitting to having certain feelings and doing certain things, like it all depends on what your experience was like. I think I would have been fine to be on camera had mine been limited to the experience I had after my daughter was born.
Yeah,
So
and I think like you said too earlier, like it also depends on your life context and the type of work that you do,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
I think that's wise.
yeah, for sure. And so that's
Yeah.
why sometimes when people that have newly experienced postpartum psychosis come out and they want to be advocates, I'm always like, that's great. But sometimes I'm always like, sometimes cautioning them about to think about that because had my psychiatrist not pointed that out to me, like in
Mm,
that initial excitement of being like, yes, I'm out of this, I want to share with the world. Like there are things that you don't really reflect on, right? So I'm always
yeah.
like, and I don't mean to dampen things for people, but I do want them to really reflect and remember this goes beyond this moment. The things that you say and do will follow you. And if you're very early in your career or whatever, then, you know, just be cognizant. I'm so grateful that my psychiatrist is such a wise woman, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. On that, what advice would you give more broadly to someone who has recently experienced postpartum psychosis? Beyond advocacy, general advice.
I think general advice I would just give is really first take the time to learn more about this illness. Learn more about it, understand it, process what you've been through, because the last thing you really want to do is throw yourself out into so much advocacy work and then be triggered by something.
Yeah.
Because then when you're in this position of you're okay, like, okay, I'm so excited, I'm gonna help people. And then somebody says something to you like, okay, I keep hearing a voice in my head telling me to stab my son. And then now suddenly you're like, I have to drop off the radar because this is now, you've actually, like, you're abandoning a person that's in need, that had hoped to get help from you. And now they feel even lousier because they feel like they triggered you. You know what I mean? So really take time, don't jump in. Like, there's lots of different little ways to start. And sometimes too, like, when you're doing advocacy work, if you've not done that, if you've not gained enough information about postpartum psychosis, you can say things that are wrong and people are listening to you. And then do you really want to say something that's like not accurate, and then somebody holds on to that and that impact? So take time to learn, take time to start small. I've been doing this advocacy work for like close to 20 years now, right? The stuff that I do now is very different from the stuff I started off initially doing. And initially in my book, I talk about it. The type of work that I used to do is I used to be a teaching patient, which is my psychiatrist gave me this opportunity to work with second and third year medical students, and they could practice their interviewing skills on me about my experience. That doesn't sound very glamorous, but it really helped me to know how to refine my story, how to, in terms of presenting my story and stuff like that. The way you do your advocacy work, it doesn't need to be glamorous. If your intention is to spread awareness, and make sure that you're doing it from a place of knowledge, awareness, awareness of the issues, you know?
Yeah. I love some of the on the topic of advocacy work. You have a couple statistics that you use with your socials. Can you share some of those, like the Down syndrome, like
Oh, yeah.
comparison?
Yeah. So people always like, talk about like, oh, it's rare. And I can say that now I think finally we've gotten to a place after like 20 years of advocacy work by survivors and stuff where we no longer really see this, but people always like to say, oh, postpartum psychosis is rare. And it's not rare. It occurs in 1 to 2 out of 1,000 live births, which is actually at par with the statistic of Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, which is like 1 in 700. Now, the thing that you also need to remember is that the statistic refers to live after live births. Postpartum psychosis also occurs after miscarriage, loss, termination. Those people are not even accounted for. Also, the statistic only refers to people who received inpatient care. My 2 episodes would never have been counted into that statistic. So, is postpartum psychosis rare at this point? No, it's not. I hate the word rare also at a personal level, because I really do believe it sends that message that nobody really needs to worry about it or gain any knowledge about it, which is frankly what I believe happened with all those doctors. They were like, it's rare, we'll never see it. And there it is right in front of you with the woman telling you everything that she possibly could except self-diagnosing herself. And you still can't see it because you filed it away in the rare files, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that number is much higher. That's
Yeah,
like my
definitely. I think it's way higher. And an interesting thing that my perinatal psychiatrist told me when I went to drop her off a copy of my book is she said, because of my experience with you, you have to think about it like this. She is a perinatal psychiatrist, so she only sees people already that doctors have flagged as needing help, right? But she said 1 in 10 of those women that I see, I now diagnose with postpartum psychosis because of what I've learned from your experience. So I'm not saying that 1 in 10 of the people, but she said, because of what I've learned from working with you and reading your book and stuff like that, I've learned to change the questions that I ask. Because of that, I definitely do agree that that statistic is higher. And another statistic that I talk about a lot is that 90% of parents experience intrusive thoughts. And that's why it's so important to understand the difference between intrusive thoughts and visual hallucinations, because they are not the same thing at all. And you don't want every 9 out of 10 parents thinking that they're hallucinating when they're experiencing intrusive thoughts.
Right. Yes. Yes. That's a important one too. And I think, I mean, it's important to talk about the distinction between all these symptoms because often, at least for me, an experience postpartum is your first touch point with mental health. And you're like, wait, what? Like, what is
Yeah.
this versus this? And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's important. Anything else you wish more people understood about postpartum psychosis?
I think the biggest two things that I really wish people understood is that women with postpartum psychosis who have had tragic outcomes to their stories never wanted to harm their children. The hallucinations and delusions maybe felt them compelled to do so, or in their mind mess it up into thinking that they were doing something good rather than, bad. So this idea that they want to harm their kids is completely off. And the fact that, and that's why I called my book A Mom Like That, because people are always like, oh yes, I'm struggling, but I'm not like a mom like that, like a mom that would do that. But really, I always dare people, like, read my book and then tell me you're not a mom like me, because I was doing everything possible to try to get help and stop myself from doing these things. So that's one thing that I wish that people understood, that these moms did not want to harm their children. They did not want to take their child's life. It is because of the symptoms of this illness that warped their mind. The second thing is that I want everybody to know that this illness absolutely never needs to claim lives, because it is temporary and fully treatable. And nobody needs to suffer relentlessly, or even, I don't know, I would say doesn't even need to suffer. The minute that you start experiencing these kinds of things, awareness can be the difference between saving a life or losing a life.
Yes. Yes. It's treatable. There's help for you. I love the idea of, I mean, I don't know about prevention, but we can definitely lessen the trauma or the crisis of cases that do happen. And so that comes with education, knowledge, reduced stigma. And I get, yeah, like providers who have a touch point and then realize like, oh, like I can connect this now to other patients and be able to diagnose it better in going forward.
Yeah. And in terms of prevention, maybe you can't prevent it, but in people that have a risk, like the risk factors for postpartum psychosis, or have had a previous episode of postpartum psychosis, you can be prophylactically treated so that you
Yes,
don't develop,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. If you know that you're at risk, you should be doing prophylactic,
Yes.
being proactive about it. But for people, I feel like what's tricky is when a mom presents first, like this is her first experience postpartum, like she doesn't know of any risk factors.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do you, versus like if you already have a bipolar diagnosis, your
Mm-hmm.
provider should know to be watching for that.
That's right. Yeah.
I am so grateful for this conversation with Aaisha. It was incredibly insightful, and her story is such a powerful one. I want to pause and reiterate something that sits underneath her experience that she spoke to: racial inequities in healthcare. These are real, they're well documented. For example, Black women in the United States are 3 times more likely than white women to die from pregnancy-related complications. They are also more likely to experience complications that affect both short and long-term health. And while many factors are at play here, including higher rates of underlying health conditions and barriers to quality care, the data show that women of color face significant disparities in how their symptoms are taken seriously and treated. So one angle I looked at this was pain treatment. Pain is often undertreated, and the data is pretty stark. For racial and ethnic minority communities, they are much more likely to suffer from ineffective pain treatment. I also want to just spotlight this comparison that Aaisha made to less common conditions. So like Down syndrome, 1 in 640 babies is born with Down syndrome. Cerebral palsy occurs in about 1 to 4 per 1,000 live births. And blindness, this is another thing that came up in the research paper I was looking at. Blindness affects about 1 to 2 per 1,000 kids. And yet, even though these conditions are relatively uncommon, we still research them, talk about them, and build treatment and support systems. So I love this framing. I love how Aaisha uses these to talk about postpartum psychosis and put it in perspective. The fact that something isn't highly common doesn't make it unimportant. It means that it just still deserves awareness, understanding, and care when it does occur. Please avoid the word rare when talking about postpartum psychosis. It is less common, yes, but it happens across all backgrounds, and awareness of the condition can truly save lives. Aaisha has an Instagram page under the name Aaisha Alvi Writes. I will link it in the show notes, as well as the first 5 chapters of her memoir. Honestly, you may as well just order it because those 5 chapters will reel you in. Check your local bookstore or the Amazon link in the show notes. Even the preview alone does do a remarkable job dispelling misconceptions and shedding light on what postpartum psychosis can look like. Thank you for listening, and I hope you get your equivalent of a foot bath in soon.